This event is brought to you through a joint effort of the Winona and Rochester League of Women Voters with support from the Minnesota League of Women Voters. Our co-sponsors for this forum are AAUW, Rochester and Winona branches, Project FINE, and the Winona State University American Democracy Project. We are pleased to have the following participating in tonight's event: our live audience in the Winona City Hall, our panel of speakers, members of the Rochester and Winona League of Women Voters, Minnesota League of Women Voters board representatives, members of our co-sponsoring organizations, and citizens who may be watching at home. We want to thank the City of Winona for allowing us to hold this educational forum in the council chambers, and to thank HBC for recording this event for us. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan volunteer organization organized at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While we as a league do study and take stands on issues, we do not endorse or support political parties, candidates, or tell the voters how to answer referendum questions. This forum is intended to provide the voters with information on a current, local, state, and national issue, money and politics, what is the impact in our community. It is a nonpartisan issue that the League of Women Voters has studied, continues to study, and on which it has taken positions which will be shared. The views expressed in this educational forum will begin with the current positions of the Minnesota State League of Women Voters and the U.S. League of Women Voters on this issue. The panel will respond as they choose, and those responses are their views as they present them. Following the panel responses, written questions from the audience will be offered to the speakers for response. Prior to this televised formal presentation, the audience began the conversation in the City Hall chambers at 6:30 p.m. That conversation will continue with the audience after the formal presentation from 8 to 8:30 p.m. Our timekeepers for this evening are Joan McNeil and Ruth Charles. And copies of the forum ground rules have been provided to the speakers, and copies are available this evening for the public. I will review briefly a few of those ground rules for this forum. The audience is expected to be courteous and good listeners. This is a live cable TV broadcast. The audience is asked not to express support or concern during the forum and to hold their applause until the end of the forum. We would like to remind everyone to please turn off your cell phones and pagers. Pictures and recordings not authorized by the League of Women Voters are prohibited. This forum will be video recorded, which may not be edited and must be broadcast in its entirety and in accord with all FCC regulations. During the forum, we ask the live audience and our TV viewers to submit written questions or call them in at 457-8280. Members from the League of Women Voters and co-sponsors will sort the questions for the moderator. The moderator will ask the questions. The question sorters will determine the questions to be asked, and attempts in good faith will be made to cover all areas of interest on this issue expressed by the audience. Questions that are hostile, partisan, embarrassing, inappropriate, or of a personal nature will not be asked. Questions on similar topics may be grouped, and question phrasing may be modified at the discretion of the moderator. Please be aware that due to time constraints, we cannot guarantee that all submitted questions will be addressed during the live broadcast. For those citizens at home, we again remind you to call in your questions at 457-8280. Speakers will observe time limits, and our timekeepers will hold up cards to indicate that time is about to expire. Once the stop card is displayed, the panel member will stop at the end of their current sentence. We will now begin with introductory remarks regarding the Minnesota and U.S. League of Women Voters positions. Our first speaker is Susan Sheridan Tucker, the Executive Director of the Minnesota League of Women Voters. She will introduce you to Lonnie Screnther, member of the League of Women Voters U.S. Money and Politics Committee. Susan?
Thanks, Stephanie. Good evening, and I bring greetings from our state board of directors, and it's really a pleasure to be with you here this evening. Tonight, this forum is just one of several forums that we will be conducting around the state of Minnesota over the next few months, and our intent is to engage you all in a level of conversation around this very complex issue. We know that when we've gone around talking about campaign finance reform, it tends to be very complex, and frankly, people tend to glaze their eyes over on this topic. And so our intent tonight is to bring this topic to a point where each of you walk away this evening with a better understanding of the issues, and hope that you will engage your representatives, your elected officials, and your friends and neighbors in why this topic is so important. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Lonnie Skretner, who is currently the local league president of the Edina League. And Lonnie has been a member of the Edina League for about the past 11 years. And she spent her career as a high school social studies teacher. In addition to her involvement on the local level, Lonnie is our representative at the national level, task force that is studying money in politics. And Lonnie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Susan. This is, as Susan said, a very complex issue. From the 1920s, the core mission of the League of Women Voters has been the expansion and the protection of voting rights and clean, open elections. Money certainly impacts that. As Stephanie said, the League studies and takes positions, and we do lobby on issues where we have reached a position. We are a grassroots organization where no change is made to our position until local leagues have studied, discussed, and reached consensus on the issue. Then our national board looks to see whether there is a national consensus for change. Right now, our campaign finance positions go back to 1974. They were modified in 1982, and basically they have 4 principles. We believe, as an organization, that the methods of financing political campaigns should firstly ensure the public's right to know. Secondly, combat corruption and undue influence. Thirdly, enable candidates to compete more equitably. And lastly, to allow maximum citizen participation in the political process. In 2014, the Massachusetts League brought forward the issue of money in politics to our national convention, asking the national organization to start a study to update our campaign finance position, because as you will notice, there is nothing in there about free speech, about the First Amendment, and the direction that has been taken recently by the Supreme Court, particularly in the 2010 Citizens United decision, is the idea that political speech is obviously free speech, and that the money that finances that speech must be protected in the same way as someone standing behind a microphone. A super majority, quite truthfully, of convention in June of 2014 approved the idea of a study, and there has been a national committee with representatives from several states and members of our national board at work since August of 2014. I have served on that national committee. Basically, we've been trying to consider, and what we all need to consider as citizens, what are the rights of individuals and organizations under the First Amendment to express their political views through independent expenditures, through some of the things that have been mentioned already here this evening: dark money, PACs, super PACs, C4s, all these cute little terms that have been engendered by the idea that money is speech. As I said, LWV has worked on this issue from back in the 1970s. We backed the original Federal Election Campaign Act in the early 1970s. We backed and lobbied for the passage of McCain-Feingold in 2002. Using our present position, we filed amicus briefs on the losing side in both Citizens United and McCutcheon in 2014. Many people get those two things confused. Citizens United is about unlimited, independent expenditures being political speech. McCutcheon is about individual donation limits, like, for instance, what was being spoken about for Alita Messenger on the state level. And McCutcheon basically did away with any sort of individual contribution limits. You can limit what is given to an individual candidate or a political party, but you cannot limit what an individual citizen gives overall. So if I want to donate money to every candidate in the state, I can do that, and I can give each one of them the maximum amount allowable by law. Since Citizens United, we have worked on two things: transparency in financing political campaigns. And so we have lobbied for the passage of a Disclose Act at the national level, and we lobbied in favor of the bill that went nowhere here in Minnesota during our last session. We continue to fight big money and its influence in elections because we think, at least now, we have to discuss this, that there is an undue influence that the Supreme Court is not seeing. The Supreme Court has ruled that only true bribery is corruption, that you cannot target, and this is a quote, the general gratitude that a candidate might feel towards a donor by giving them perhaps better meeting times, more time, etc. We will continue to work on this, and we will, by February of next year, have turned in all of our local league ideas on this issue, and probably by next June, our national board will have decided whether to change and how to change our national position on money in politics.
Thank you. Now the rest of our panelists will have an opportunity to present their positions. We will start with Professor Matt Bosworth, Winona State University, Political Science and Public Administration.
Well, thank you, first of all, to the League, and also thank you to my fellow panelists for being here tonight, and certainly also, thank you all in the audience in City Hall who showed up, and any of you, say, watching on television. Summarizing campaign finance in 4 minutes. Not an easy task by any means, although I think Ms. Lonnie Screntner has done a great job with it. I guess that my perspective is that we've been struggling about how to reconcile issues of money in politics, pretty much from the founding of the Republic. And that I think that one of the reasons why it's been so difficult for us has been that on the one side we believe very strongly in free speech. We believe very strongly that the government, should not be able to dictate what is said in political campaigns, and should not shut out those who want to support their favorite candidate. On the other side, we also believe very strongly in the idea of democracy, the idea of one person, one vote, that everybody's vote should count equally to a great extent. And so, that we hold both of those values true at the same time, both freedom and equality. Again, making it difficult to reach a solution. That my own area of focus at Winona State is in law and courts, especially the Supreme Court. And so that I guess that I look to 1976 when the Supreme Court decided a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, in which the court said that basically candidate spending would have to be unlimited. That to limit how much a candidate could spend in a campaign would unduly limit their First Amendment free speech rights. But on the other hand, that individuals could be limited in terms of contributions to candidates. So again, contributions could be limited, but not spending. That doesn't make pure logical sense. I'm not sure about that. But I think that the tension there, again, also goes back to this tension about freedom and equality. As Ms. Lonnie Screntner mentioned, that the Supreme Court in the last few years has really been opening up further ways of getting around the limits on contributions, whether it's, say, by corporations or taking off some of the limits on wealthy individuals to be able to give unlimited amounts of money to or in an entire election cycle. rather than to each individual candidate. I guess that, to hopefully briefly summarize here, that one thing that I think about in terms of the future is that on the U.S. Supreme Court, not to put too fine a point on it, but in the next, that these decisions have been very narrowly decided, and with the same justices in the majority and the same justices in the dissent, that in the next presidential term, that 4 of the justices are going to be 80 years old or older. And so it's certainly possible that some or all of them might end up leaving the court. And by the way, that 2 of those justices are in the majority in cases like Citizens United, and 2 of the justices are in the dissent. So I think it's very fair to say that the next president and the next president's appointments to the Supreme Court are going to have a great deal of influence as to which direction the court takes these issues.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Jeff Thompson, the Chief Judge of Minnesota's 3rd Judicial District.
Good evening. Again, thank you for the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum. I'm a judge. Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission of 2010 is the law of the land. As a judge, I am required to follow the law, even if I may personally disagree with it. Judges are also prohibited from giving legal advice, but we can discuss our views about controversial issues thanks to the majority opinion in Republican Party versus White, where the Republican Party wanted to have the power to endorse judges and allow judges to seek endorsements. Corporations are not people. Corporations are creatures of the government. However, Citizens United held that corporations have the right of free speech under the First Amendment. Foreign investors or no, publicly traded or not private nonprofit, corporations have the right of free speech. Money is speech in the view of the majority of the Supreme Court. Federal statutes barring independent expenditures by corporations for electioneering communications are unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court has expanded that to include limits imposed by state laws, specifically Montana, and independent expenditures by individuals, McCutcheon. Donor identity laws may provide some checks and balances by allowing voters to know who is paying for electioneering communications. This is just like in court. We judge the credibility of the witnesses by who they are, by knowing who they are. But we're not there yet. The often forgotten message of Citizens United is that laws requiring public disclosure of names of donors to candidates and to groups funding political speech, such as super PACs and the so-called charitable organizations known as 501c4s, is the antidote to what some consider the poisonous flood of campaign cash. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. The judge's role in these civic disputes is limited. Judges are to act as nonpartisan, impartial evaluators and enforcers. We are forbidden to recruit cases for court. Often, being a good judge means letting our democratic system work to resolve disputes. The system works if we give it a chance to work. But I would like to pose 2 questions tonight. 1, do we support open disclosure of the personal names of all campaign donors, including those contributing to so-called charities like 501c4s and the super PACs? And should the voters know who's paying for electioneering communications? That's 1. And 2, when do we call a judge an activist? And here's what I mean. Chief Justice Roberts, in his concurring opinion in Citizens United, talked about stare decisis and precedent, and when it's appropriate to overrule that. One example is Dred Scott, 1857 pre-Civil War case that decided that blacks have no rights under the United States Constitution. The Supreme Court in Citizens United overturned 2 precedents. I think the seeds of the Citizens United reversal maybe have laid. But closer to home, I was responsible for the 30% rule. You all know about that, I imagine. And that was upheld on the Court of Appeals and then ruled moot. During the arguments, I asked the lawyer for the homeowners, were they asking me to, who were asking me to invalidate a city council ordinance, are you asking me to be an activist judge? And he said, no, we're asking you to be an engaged judge. Where's the balance?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Gene Pelowski, Minnesota Legislative House of Representatives.
Yes, I also want to thank the League of Women Voters. As a past president of the Winona League of Voters, I've worked with the League on these issues over the last 30 years. The impact of the League is great, both in Minnesota and in Washington, D.C., but it's not because of the amount of money they spend. It's because they are a grassroots organization, and they apply what they do from the bottom up. And they are listened to, both in St. Paul, and I can't speak for Washington. My comments tonight are going to be restricted to legislative races. I don't run for Congress. I don't serve in Congress. I don't work in the White House. I don't work on presidential campaigns. I have run a few legislative campaigns. And what we've seen over the last 15 years is the doubling of the amount of money spent on legislative races. Now, you're looking for a legislative seat whose occupant will earn, over the course of a year, $31,000. $31,000. Not $120,000, not $400,000, $31,000. In 2014, there are 3 races we could take a look at, legislative races. I'm going to repeat again, where the occupant, the winner, will be paid $31,000, where the following amounts were spent. The St. Cloud race. This is both sides. This is what you can find out in the document that Representative Drazkowski passed out. Both sides spent $726,221 to win a seat where the occupant is paid $31,000. In the Burnsville seat, $405,707 for the winner to be paid $31,000. Albert Lee Owatonna, $490,971. Now that's what we can see in that campaign report. That's what's registered. It's easily applicable that you could double most of these by the money that comes in that isn't registered. We know in these races that there were media hits on these candidates, both sides, where there were daily postcards of about this size. This isn't a prop, it's just a symbol. Where glossy on both sides, articulating issues, maybe true, maybe wrong, stuffed in mailboxes. There was television, there was cable, there was every type of influence you could possibly have that isn't in the money I just listed. I will tell you, in those 3 races, the incumbent lost. So, is there influence of money in legislative races? Yes. Has it grown? Yes. Can we control it? We can control some of it, but the size of these contributions are basically controlled by the federal government. And the control of those donations and how they're applied almost always is going to have to be controlled at the federal level.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Representative Steve Drazkowski from the Minnesota Legislative House.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for inviting me here today. Like Representative Pelowski, I do serve in the Minnesota House and don't have some of the context of some of the other areas with judges and federal government. But as we have had discussions about this issue in the Minnesota House, there have been some efforts that have come forward to actually limit speech and limit people's ability to spend money within Minnesota. And I think as we look at what the founders laid out with our Constitution, we need to be mindful of what it says. And I think when you get into things like disclosure and some of those things, they're not as offensive as the idea of thinking that government can come forward and engineer people's ability to have speech or not. And so I think that's something in this discussion we need to keep clear. I've shared some materials earlier, and for those viewing at home, there is a 2013-14 campaign finance report. If you want to learn more, it's several hundred pages long, and it's called the State of Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board 2013-14 Campaign Finance Summary. Everything you always wanted to know for your bedtime reading is there, but a lot of detail in there if you really want to dig into this issue. Now, we do have arguments amongst ourselves, both within our caucuses, within our bipartisanly, as well within the Minnesota House about this issue of, do you take political action campaign, political action committee and lobbyist money? Some of us don't, and I don't, and I have never taken it. I've sent thousands of dollars that have been sent to me by PACs and lobbyists back to them saying, no, thank you. Now, at a legislative level, we can do that. We get to a governor's race or a U.S. House race or a U.S. Senate race or more, it's very hard for them to avoid those sources of campaign money because they will not have the level of speech or the ability to get their campaign message out, so it's kind of difficult. One of the areas, and I want to introduce another area, I don't know about the scope of tonight's meeting, but one of the things we talk about as well, and I think maybe for our listeners to be cognizant of, is the amount of local government spending, your local property taxes that is used by your local government, whether it's Winona County or the city of Winona or the city of Goodview, to hire lobbyists either directly or through their associations, through the municipal or county associations, to hire lobbyists to come to the Capitol to influence our legislative work. Basically, using your tax money to go to the Capitol to leverage more tax money out of your pocket. Something very concerning to me. I wrote the numbers down. I've got the book, 380 pages, if anybody wants to read it. Every municipality in the state and the amount of money that, taxpayer money they spend on lobbying, 4.2 million plus 3.5 million, 7.7 million during 2014 alone. $7.7 million of local property tax money spent by local units of government to go to St. Paul to try to get more of your money. I can't speak for Representative Pelowski, but I have very good contact with my county commissioners and city council members and believe that this is an area that could use some attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final panelist is Fatima, the Executive Director of Project Fine.
Thank you, Stephanie, and good evening, everyone. As Stephanie says, my name is Fatima Said, and I'm not an elected official, and I'm not running for anything, not yet. But I believe that there is many ways that we can serve our community and our country, and one example is this event, and I want to take opportunity to thank League of Women Voters for organizing this event, and for all of you for being here to care enough to participate. As you can tell from my beautiful accent, I'm not a native Minnesotan. My husband and I came in this country 22 years ago as a refugee with 2 children, 2 bags, and a lot of hope for better life. I have been a naturalized citizen for 17 years, and I certainly enjoy every moment of that. Being an American for me as a naturalized citizen means so much. Listening all this that we heard tonight is a music for my ears, even if we disagree, even if we can do things better, because I'm coming from society that I grew up, was educated and almost aged with one party system and with one president. Being able to exercise our right and responsibility as a citizen of the United States is a joy, it's a privilege, and I certainly enjoy. With my work at Project Fine, a nonprofit organization here in Winona County, we have been serving Winona County and surrounding regions for over 25 years, providing resources and information to refugee and immigrants, and serving our local communities as well, educational institution, government, private sector, by providing information and building bridges between receiving community and newcomers in this community. What it means to be an American. For us that are naturalized citizens, and there is many in our community and our region, it's culmination of all our hopes and dreams for better life. And to take a participation and active role in our system, the power of we the people, voting power, is something that we take very seriously. In Project Find, we cannot do lobbying, we cannot tell people for who to vote, but we certainly make sure that we educate our new naturalized citizens, that we provide information, what is important, that they can get involved, that they can vote, and that they can be informed and take active role in our community, our state, and our country. I won't be able to answer any questions about money and politics, but I certainly enjoy being here, and I'm happy to hear everyone on this panel and certainly appreciate you having here. Thank you.
Thank you. So having heard from each of our panelists regarding their positions, we will begin with some of the written questions we've received from our audience. Our first question is there a problem with campaign finance? And if so, what is the problem? Who would like to tackle that one? It's a big question.
It's a very big question, and I think the answer is it depends. This is the basic discussion that our league, our cities, our states, our national government needs to have. Whether there is a problem with unlimited money. There are people who say that unlimited money is simply more speech, and the more speech, the better. And the league is considering that question right now. We don't have our answer yet.
Yes. Actually, that since Representatives Pelowski and Drazkowski were talking a little bit more about the state level, I thought I'd interject regarding the national level, and perhaps that this is part of the potential problem, that these days, if you want to run for the U.S. House of Representatives, realistically, you probably have to raise and spend about $1 million.
Minimum.
A minimum, yeah, and that if it's very contested, it's entirely possible $2 million. That depending upon the state, that if you want to run for a U.S. Senate seat, you're probably looking at about $10 million. And I think that that's a significant issue in that basically you just give people those figures and that they think, oh, I can never do that. And basically any potential candidacy would be stifled. I think that that's a problem for democracy, regardless of which party you support.
Thank you. Our next question, and I'll let someone volunteer to answer this one as well. Define dark money.
Well, I will take a shot at it. That dark money to me would be money that is intended to influence an election, but that is unaccountable. That is that we don't know what the source of it is. Oftentimes, one way or the other, coming through some kind of independent expenditure. That is money that is not given directly to a candidate or a campaign, but instead would be spent oftentimes on television advertisements. But again, the key problem for democracy is that we don't know the source of the money.
Judge Thompson?
In what's called a 501c4 under the Internal Revenue Code, those are charitable organizations, and they do not have to disclose their donors. They have the right to spend money on electioneering communications as long as they're not coordinated with a campaign candidate, as long as they're not coordinated. So the best way for them to, in most cases, is to use negative election campaigns, negative election ads. That's the most bang for the buck. That's what I think of as dark money.
Ms. Renton?
The other thing that appears to be happening is that these organizations are not supposed to coordinate with candidates, so candidates wait to declare. They spend a lot of time going around saying, well, I'm just investigating running for president. Meanwhile, I'm headlining fundraisers at $1,000, $2,000 a plate, and all of that money is going into either a super PAC or an independent organization that will not have to disclose, and that is eventually going to be spent for that candidate's election.
Okay, one more follow-up.
Sure, actually, and since the U.S. Supreme Court has come up a little bit here, that I did want to point out that at least so far, the U.S. Supreme Court has really not had any problem in terms of political disclosure requirements. That is, in terms of requiring individuals to disclose, the campaign contributions. Also, that there was a case where the Supreme Court ruled that disclosing the names of people who signed petitions for ballot questions, that requiring those names to be disclosed did not violate anybody's First Amendment rights.
Thank you. We have somewhat of a follow-up question to that question, which is, how can we return the vote to the people without the influence of big and dark money? Somebody want to start with that one? Ms. Stratton?
I agonize over these answers because I have to keep saying the league has not decided exactly in which direction we're headed as an organization. How do we do it? You can, the Supreme Court has said disclosure is fine. The Supreme Court has also said public financing is fine. And there is some evidence that when public financing is put in place and candidates opt into it, it lowers overall expenses. So there are some ways to go that would limit money.
Our next, Representative Drazkowski?
I'd just like to add on what Ms. Kretner said. I am talking about the limitations that we have in the state of Minnesota on spending. And I did have a bill last session to remove some of the public financing that we have. So we have, the other side of that argument is this. We have a state legislature in this case that pulls tax money together, the people's money, taken against their will from people who work very hard every day, and then spent on political campaigns, to subsidize political campaigns. And that's the other side of that. Is it fair for Joe or Jane Doe, who are out there working hard every day to raise their family, to take money from them in order to subsidize a political campaign? And that's what we're doing with that money. So it's a two-sided sword. So I thought I'd mention that.
Our next question. Why is it so difficult to have full disclosure of monetary contributions? Who would like to start with that? Ms. Sheridan Tucker.
Simply, it's transparency. And this way we know where the money is going and where it's coming from.
Ms. Stratton.
On the opposite side, though, the Supreme Court has upheld, and I don't remember the names of the cases, an implied right under the First Amendment to a privacy of association. And if you extend that to this issue, why should my name be disclosed? I have a right to a privacy of association with the members of this group who are spending my money.
Any other responses?
Yeah, I would say to a certain extent, although the court itself has been less willing to recognize that type of right in the context of political campaigns and campaign finance. That is, that the court has said that basically that lists of donors could only be hidden if there was some kind of really tangible fear of retaliation against the donors. That there was a case some years ago involving the Socialist Party in Ohio in which the Supreme Court said, yeah, those people probably would be retaliated against. But otherwise, that basically that in the context of political campaigns, that donors' names, that there's no First Amendment association problem with making those public. I think that the issue is that the law itself is not required that they be made public.
That leads us into our next question to some extent. Do you know who runs the PACs from whom candidates accept money? Representative Drazkowski.
Yeah, Stephanie, they have to be registered with the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board in the state of Minnesota. So go to their website and you can find at least the person who is registered with them. Usually a chairperson and a treasurer, I think. And you can at least, and a phone number, so that information is available.
Representative Pelowski.
Many of the, what we would call a PAC in a legislative race, has a local unit. That local unit makes the recommendation. So the Chamber of Commerce has a local chamber. They will recommend to the Minnesota Chamber who gets the endorsement. Winona Education Association has a local unit. They will recommend to Education Minnesota who gets the endorsement. So in Minnesota, you can trace it right back to the local unit. It's rare that the state unit will not accept whatever decision's being made by the local. It happens sometimes. But again, you're looking at, compared to the congressional and presidential races, a fraction of the amount of money that would be donated from those organizations called a PAC, as opposed to a congressional PAC or a presidential PAC.
Ms. Scranton.
On the national level and in congressional and Senate races, this is an issue because it leads to what the Supreme Court has said shouldn't happen, which is coordination. Any of these independent expenditures are supposed to be truly independent, not have a link to the candidate. And yet, very often, you find that the C4s and these super PACs just happen to be chaired by someone who used to be the candidate's chief of staff or their legislative aide or something like that. And that's an issue.
Yes. And to build off of that right now we're back to a situation where the Supreme Court says that as long as the independent expenditure ad does not say vote for a particular candidate or vote against a particular candidate, everything else that they will say about that particular candidate would be fair game and not treated as a contribution.
Thank you. Our next question. Should individuals enjoy the right of privacy when making contributions to either of candidates or freedom associations entities, and that they might choose to use to pool their individual contributions? Do I need to re-summarize that one?
The last part of it didn't make a lot of sense.
Should individuals enjoy the right of privacy when making contributions to either of the candidates or freedom of association for entities that they might choose to use to pool their individual contributions? Judge Thompson?
Well, I think the problem is that there are, the New York Times, whatever you think of them, said there's about 400 families in the United States that spend about 70% of all the campaign funds in the United States. And if you're one of those families and you want to just influence elections and buy influence, you are welcome to do that. But it seems to me this is just like being in court. If I just get an affidavit that has no name or a witness who won't be identified, I'm not in a position to evaluate that person. So, frankly, I would say that unless there is a clear situation of actual potential retaliation, no, I don't think they should have the right to remain private.
Any other responses to that question? Representative Drazkowski?
Well, yeah, I think there are times when it certainly is an issue there, and I can't remember the specific situations, but there was some in the last cycle. I heard from some of my colleagues and other people around the Capitol about desires to go in and actually get the entire list of people who have contributed from organizations. the ability to give to a nonprofit organization and then have that contribution then be construed as a political contribution, even though that may not have been the intent, drags those people in with it too. So, something to consider, but thank you.
Judge Thompson.
A good example is what happened, was it 2010 with Tom Emmer? When Target Corporation gave Mr. Emmer, who was running for governor, money, and then he made some comment about gay marriage or gay relationships that caused a lot of grief for Target. Target, I think a lot of people thought maybe Target shouldn't be held accountable for that. And I guess that's a question for the voters. Should people be held accountable?
Professor Bosworth, you'll continue.
Yes, I guess I'll weigh in here. I wanted to say, at least in the case of unions, that say, including the union that I'm a part of, the IFO at Winona State, that there's a separation between political contributions that the union might make and collective bargaining dues. So in other words, that no one is forced to actually contribute money to political campaigns, that the only contributions that they're making, that they're required to make, would be for collective bargaining.
All right, our next question follows up again. Is it morally acceptable to have anonymous contributions to campaigns or for, quote, informational, end quote, broadcasts? Someone like to take that question? Ms. Grantner.
It is not legal, moral. Morality is not judged by law, by and large. You cannot donate to campaigns. Campaigns must report their contributions. They have to report a total, and depending upon the level of the race, they have to report contributions over $100 or over $200, depending upon the level of the race. So that has, and the other piece, we have to judge legality. We have to judge democracy, not morality.
Professor Bosworth?
Yes, and I think that one other question we might want to ask is basically which is more likely, that there are people who want to donate money but that are deterred by disclosure requirements, or that there are people who are giving now but who would rather not have it known. I have a feeling that the latter group is bigger than the former group. That is that, frankly, part of our problem with elections and democracy is that not enough people are giving.
That leads into our next question. We're doing really well with this. A number of candidates or potential candidates are putting large amounts of personal funds into their campaigns. Is this limiting the ability of candidates to run only to the wealthy? Someone like to tackle that one?
$1.5 million for a U.S. House seat. That's going to be a lot. That's going to be a lot less intimidating for someone in the 400 wealthiest families than it is than someone who's not.
Any other responses to that question? All right. Our next question. Can the Constitution redefine free speech and put a limit to the amount of donations or contributions? Judge Thompson?
I would say that what can happen, because it's what happened in Citizens United, is that the Supreme Court, by a 5-4 decision, decided to overturn a couple of precedents and say that the money is speech. That 5-4 decision is fragile. As I said before at one point, Chief Justice John Roberts talked about when to overturn precedents, and this might be one of those things that happens sometime in the future. the Constitution can be reinterpreted. As Robert H. Jackson said, we're not last because we're right because we're last.
Mr. Bosworth, you have something?
Yes, I guess that I would also, again, repeat what I mentioned earlier about, again, well, also as Judge Thompson said, that the Citizens United and the McCutcheon case are 5-4 decisions, and that there are going to be other justices on the Supreme Court at some point, and I think in some ways that this is really healthy because it means that we're not just being dictated to by 9 overlords. You know, whether it's on the liberal side or the conservative side, that ultimately in America, that ideally, that this will be resolved politically. And which is another reason why it's so important to be able to get informed about the issues and take a stand on them.
Ms. Gretner?
The answer to the question is yes, the Constitution could be amended. I think we all know what a long, drawn-out process that tends to be. It usually means that you have to get an amendment through the 2 houses of Congress and have it sent to the states. There are huge question marks about creating an amendment any other way. It would require the calling of a constitutional convention, which by the analysis of most people means you open the entire document up for change. Any phrasing for an amendment thus far seems to have other loopholes, other things that could cause issues. And so the idea that a constitutional amendment is some kind of panacea, nope.
Thank you.
That was very well stated.
I believe that given our time, this is going to be our last question. If someone donates $100 to a candidate, their name and donation show up on a state campaign finance report. If someone donates $1 million to a super PAC, people do not see their name. Is it fair to penalize the small donor but give the big donor anonymity? Somebody like to tackle that one?
Well, that would certainly seem to be against the league's position.
Thanks. Again, I'm going to parse words. Is it fair? Is it moral? Is it legal? The answer is it's legal. Because we have, sort of like Topsy, created these organizations as campaigns have changed and as campaigns have become more expensive. You need television time, full-page ads, postage has gone up. Everything is more expensive. So to say, is it fair? You know, that's like you say to your kids, life isn't fair, politics isn't fair. Never has been.
Other responses? We'll grab it. And we'll finish off with a local question. In a recent local county commissioner election, there were 3 super PACs spending money about 2 weeks before the election. Has this ever happened in local or county commissioner elections before? County commissioners are nonpartisan elections. Anyone know the answer to that one?
I don't know.
Super PACs in Winona County?
That's what the question
Super
says.
PACs are normally federal organizations, so
But they can spend anywhere they
They
want.
can spend wherever
and
they
they
want.
spent here, huh?
Well, I don't know about here.
Is your question that it was in Winona County, or is that it's a county race? Because some of the counties in the metropolitan area, certainly there are PACs involved.
And I believe that's the question. It says, has this ever happened in local or county commissioner elections before?
Well, if you're talking statewide, I don't know the specific answer, but in the larger counties, certainly you do have PACs involved.
third time's the charm. This should be our last question. Does the League of Women Voters advocate the Minnesota legislature to send a message to Congress to pass amendments to dismiss or cancel Citizens United?
No, that is not part of our, I mean, we right now do not have a position about campaign finance in relation to First Amendment rights. So we would not, as an organization, I don't think, be able
Not
to
at this
lobby for
point.
that. Not at this point. If we were by next spring to change our position, and then it could happen, but we only lobby based on the positions that are presently in existence.
Given our time, we are at the end of our time for this forum. We want to thank all of the speakers for an informative event. For those present in our live audience, we will continue this conversation until 8:30 p.m., so please hang around for that. The League of Women Voters would also like to thank our co-sponsors, AAUW Rochester and Winona, Project FINE, and the Winona State University American Democracy Project. We would also like to thank HBC for recording this educational forum. In closing, we remind all citizens age 18 or older, be sure you are registered to vote. It's a privilege to live in a democratic nation where your vote can make a difference. Some important 2016 Minnesota election dates to keep in mind are: precinct caucuses are on Tuesday, March 1st. March township elections will take place Tuesday, March 8th. Primary elections will take place Tuesday, August 9th. And the general election day is Tuesday, November 8th, 2016. We encourage all to participate in our democracy at every opportunity. Thank you and have a great evening. Good night.